Okay. So we're going to continue with the presentation today on creating body maps. And I'm going to talk about prerequisites for sensorimotor interaction behavior and how this is related with body maps. So for those who just connected, my name is Verena Hafner and I'm from Humboldt University in Berlin. Just a few words about our group. So we're already partner of the Shanghai lecturers since 2010. So we're partners for the 4th year. And we are enjoying it very much despite some technical problems we experience today. Our research projects are on different things, mostly related to interaction behavior and extracting intelligence from interacting robots. So you can see here some examples on imitation behavior, on humanoid robots performing sensorimotor interaction, and also some experiments on throwing, human throwing. So here we have actually the first embodied EEG experiments on humans throwing towards a target. And some other projects not only concern humanoid robots, but we also work on spatial cognition and interaction with the environment using these flying robots. And we have a few of them. We are also interested in emergent behaviors through swarm interaction. All these interactive robotics we're currently performing in the EU project on interactive robotics intro, where we're doing work on behavior and intention recognition and dynamic gesture analysis. And we're continuing that research in a new EU project on, it's called EARS, Embodied Audition for Robots, which is going to start in January 2014. So how are these body maps, or what we think about them, how are they related to the embodiment hypothesis? So just to remind you, the embodiment hypothesis says that intelligence emerges from the interaction of an agent with an environment or with other agents, and as a result of sensorimotor activity. And so basically, embodiment concerns both the cognitive, the affective, and bodily mechanisms, and they are hugely intertwined. So we're now taking a closer look at the bodily mechanisms and how they affect cognitive and affective mechanisms. The question which comes up here, while you're talking about maps, what are maps? Aren't these some sort of representations? And do we need a representation of our body to perform intelligent behavior and to interact with the real world? Well, to a certain extent, yes. If we want to go beyond Breitenberg-style vehicle behavior, we need to be able to perform sensorimotor interactions and adapt our behavior to changes in our body. And of course, when we talk about maps, we're not talking about a detailed metric model of our body, about how long is my arm from the elbow to the wrist and so on. But we talk about some ability to perform these sensorimotor interactions. And in our daily life, sensorimotor interaction is really, really important. So not just for this famous ballet dancer you can see on the slides, but in everyday life. If we want to interact on our environment, if we want to grasp something, we just have to have a representation of, or have to have some idea how to perform this behavior and get the proper outcome. It is also important for us humans to perform some sort of behavior recognition. And while we humans are experts in behavior recognition for evolutionary reason, of course, and so if we want to recognize the behavior of another person, of course, in order to recognize it, we kind of have to map it to our own body and in order to understand and recognize it. And so we are at the topic, basically we arrived at the topic of imitation behavior and how that is possible. And so what are the prerequisites for imitation behavior? So we need to be able to map some kind of observed behavior onto our own body. And here you see even some example of an interspecies imitation behavior. So this very young ape imitates its human caregiver. And actually this only works in very, very young apes. And yeah, this kind of imitation behavior is sort of the most direct form of interaction. And some explanation of how this could actually work was the discovery of the mirror neuron system by Rizzolatti and Gallese a few years ago. And what they discovered is that when we perform an action and when we observe a certain action, the same action, then the same neurons fire. So there are some neurons in our brain that fire both when we see a certain action and when we perform the action. And so there have been many studies on that, and but still the original purpose of the whole mirror neuron system, and especially the development of it, is not entirely clear yet. Coming back to what I called body maps, so Sean Gallagher made some conceptual distinction between the body schema and the body image. And basically, he said is that the body image is a system of perceptions, attitudes, and beliefs towards our own body, and the body schema is more a system of sensorimotor capacities that constantly regulate our posture and our movement. So the body schema is something which is mainly non-conscious, and when we talk about these body maps, we're mainly concerned with the body schema, so with our sensorimotor capacities, but it is also clear that this body schema influences our body image, and this relation is also very interesting. So one example which fits to these body maps is the so-called mirror test. So it works like that. You put a small red dot or a transparent dot onto the child's forehead, and you put the child in front of the mirror, and the question is, in order to remove the spot, does it touch the mirror, or does he or she touch the mirror, or does he touch her own face? And in human infants, the skill to recognize that you have to basically touch your own face in order to remove the red dot arises around the age of about 18 months. It is not quite clear what this experiment says, because is it about understanding something about yourself? Even is it something about consciousness? Or is it just understanding the concept of a mirror, which would also be possible? And well, recently it has been shown that we humans are not the only animals that could recognize ourselves in mirrors. And there has been even a test with magpies. And these young magpies have also, some researchers applied a small yellow dot onto the head of these magpies and put them in front of a mirror. And so let's have a look what happens here. Nathan, can you please play the first video?
Humans aren't the only ones aware of their own reflection. Birds can recognize themselves as well. Researchers have shown this for the first time by placing different colored dots on magpies' necks. The birds could only catch a glimpse of the stickers if they looked in the mirror. Here you can see a bird scratch its neck when it notices a brightly colored sticker. Some magpies tried to remove the sticker with their beaks, while others used their feet. Birds that were tagged with black spots that blended in with their feathers didn't react when they looked in the mirror. Magpies have bigger brains than other birds that allow for lots of connections between different brain areas. Researchers think this may explain why they can recognize themselves while other bird species may not be able to.
Okay, thanks. So that is quite surprising that basically these birds have the same skill to recognize themselves in the mirrors as humans have. So while we're still not sure whether this is really does tell something about self-recognition, self-consciousness, or just the concept of mirrors, we performed some similar experiments using mirrors with our humanoid robots now. And what we did here is we put the robot in front of the mirror and had it doing some random movement with its arms, and try to learn a connection between what the robot saw in the mirror and the actions of its own body. Could we play video 2, please? So the robot here has already learned, and the robot who's not facing us, and now is given the task of imitating the posture of the other robot. So here the robot already learned something about mapping what it sees to how it should perform, or to how it should change its motor movements, but it really doesn't have an adaptive concept of its own body yet. It's the first step. So I think we can stop the video here and come back to how we could find some way of body maps which are similar to the somatosensory maps that have been found in human cortex. So you see here a sketch on the right, how our different body parts are represented on our somatosensory cortex. So that's basically, it's a cut through our brain, along that line. And so for a long time it had been believed that these maps are rather static, and but recently it has been shown that they're quite dynamic and adaptive. But with our robot experiments, we want to go one step further and create a dynamic and even short-term representation of both the body and also the behavior. This not just holds for humans, of course, but also other animals. Like in this example, you see a mouse or a rat, and there's the barrel cortex that maps every single whisker of the mouse, which is a very important sensory modality, to a certain barrel in the cortex. So these small spots you can see on the slide, they are some kind of mapping for each single whisker of the mouse or rat. And by using these principles, we performed some experiments some years ago together with Frédéric Kaplan at Sony CSL. And by doing some robot experiments, we were measuring sensory streams without having any previous knowledge about the morphology of the robot and how the sensors were arranged. And we looked at the information distances between pairs of sensors, and the assumption behind that is that informationally close sensors are also close on the map. And so these maps, they function as some kind of body scheme, And the result you can see here on the right. So you can see the crosses are the different sensors of the robot, and you can see that by performing an algorithm which is based on these information distances, you can see that they arrange on this kind of two-dimensional map in a way that relates also how these sensors are arranged on the robot's body. In a different experiment, so here we learned something about the morphology of the sensors, but we don't know yet how the sensory information maps to the motor capacities. In the next experiment, we did some work on motor babbling on the humanoid robot Now. That was work mainly done by my PhD student, Guido Spilacci. And we used, you can see these tags on the image, and we used these tags that are put on the hand of the robot in order to create some mapping between what the robot sees, where the robot thinks its hand is, and the motor command that the robot executes to move its arm. And we started with a very simple behavior, which is just some random motor babbling. Nathan, can you please show the video 3? So that's how the motor babbling or body babbling of the robot looks like. It's kind of slow, and the robot is doing that for half an hour or so until it really explored its whole sensorimotor space, while restricted to the upper body of the robot, of course. In this example, the robot is only using its right arm. And of course, this motor babbling is inspired from body babbling of very young children who are not able to do some intentional reach to a certain object yet, but just do some appearingly random movements with their hands. And then later on, the experienced view of where the hand is, the experienced position of the hand, can then be mapped to the necessary motor action that has to be performed in order to reach exactly some object at a given position. And here's a drawing of the action spaces of the Now robot. You can see here. So the robot has a certain space that is reachable, and you can do the babbling and learning for each of the arms of the robot. And I think we can stop the video here. I think we got the point. And now here you can see the action spaces again. And the robot was now able to learn how to reach a certain position in space, giving this learning. And for the learning, we just did some simple K and N, so you could basically use any kind of learning algorithm here. And when we did this experiment, interesting question came up. So what happens if the desired object is outside the field of reach of the robot? And by looking a bit further into that, it came out that it's not entirely clear yet how children learned to perform pointing gestures. Whether is there a relation between producing pointing gestures and understanding them. There's still some debate going on. And so one hypothesis is that children learn how to point by just trying to reach something which is out of reach. So, and by that they already perform this kind of pointing gesture, which could then be socially reinforced, and pointing arises. And we did a similar experiment here with our humanoid robots. So we trained the robot. The robot learned the sensorimotor mapping by doing this body babbling, and then we put an object in front of the robot, but outside its field of reach. And of course, what was the robot doing? The resulting behavior was the robot was pointing at that object. And of course, there's a very simple explanation for that, but it could be shown with a very simple experiment that was the emergent behavior. Could we please see video 4? So here again is the motor babbling. And after the learning step, you can see we now put the tag onto this object, this little cube, and you could see that the robot was pointing towards that cube. Yeah, maybe you could already show video 5. That's just a short example on how you could now use this learned behavior of pointing towards a certain object. We used that for an attention experiment. So the robot had some sort of visual attention here, and we did some studies on human-robot interaction and how the attention behavior of the robot influenced the human. So our subjects were quite keen on interacting with the robot, and we did some experiment at the end where we did an avoiding interaction behavior on purpose, so the robot deliberately looked away from the object we showed him, and this also had some quite interesting influence on our human subjects. So now we've already learned how to perform a certain behavior, and the robot learned something about how it could kind of automatically control its body just by doing this motor babbling and learning through the motor babbling. And we now want to see how could this action, how could a more complicated action be performed. And for that we looked at simulation theory, which is nicely defined by Lawrence Barcelou. So he says that simulation is the reenactment of perceptual, motor, and introspective states acquired during experience with the world, body, and mind. So basically, if you want to perform some interesting behavior, you kind of first internally experience it because you've already made this experience at an earlier point in time, and because your direct sensory feedback might be delayed or might be noisy. So that's a good thing to do. And there are several models on internal simulations already existing. So for example, there's the mosaic model by Wolfert and Carato, which is a purely theoretical neuroscientific model. And then there's the hammer model by Demiris and Kaduri, which has been already applied on a robot. You can see here this peoplebot recognizing humans performing certain actions like displacing this cup of Coke here. And we wanted to go a bit further into these internal simulations and actually really learning the full internal model by learning both the forward and the inverse model. I'll show you that in a second. So again here we have the humanoid robot performing some actions with its hand in space. And now for each of the arms we kind of learn a different internal model where the robot can then what the robot can do, it can predict the necessary motor command from the given sensory information now and the desired sensory information. that's the controller, and it can use a predictor where the current sensory information goes in together with the motor information, and the new hypothesized sensory information comes out as an output. So basically, you're kind of internally simulating your sensorimotor actions in the environment, and both the internal model and the forward model, they're both trained by body babbling in our experiments. And for the learning algorithm, you can again use whatever you like. You can use instance-based learning algorithms such as k-nearest neighbors. You could use artificial neural networks such as multi-layer perceptrons. You could use Bayesian approaches and so on. And now, if we have for each of the two arms of the robot, if we learn by doing this motor babbling, if we learn a separate model that both consists of an inverse and a forward model, so you can see in green the left arm and in purple the right arm. Then, if you then give the robot a certain object, the robot reaches with the arm that's where the prediction error is lower. So here, of course, if you have two arms which are kind of similar, the results are quite obvious that you can better reach with the right arm the position on the right, and better with the left arm positions on the left. And so for two similar arms, the decision of which arm to use is maybe not so interesting, but in further experiments, you could extend that to tool use. For example, give the robot a tool in one of its arms, one of its hands, and then by having these models trained, the robot could then decide which tool to use and how to interact with the tool in its environment. So because there's not much time, if you're interested in further in that, please have a look at our publications. And I'd like to summarize now on this talk. So I give a quick overview on how body maps in robots could be created through sensorimotor interaction behavior. One idea is using information distances to learn more about the sensory morphology. And the second idea is using internal simulations for coding sensorimotor schemes. So thank you very much, and I'd also like to thank all the contributors to this research, the whole cognitive robotics group at Humboldt University, and if you want to find out more, just please go on our website. Thank you. And yeah, maybe I can answer some questions now. Are there any questions to the presentation?
Oh, there is a question from Moscow.
Yes, I have a question. The action field of the robot was different on the left side and on the right side. And what is the reason? No, not this. Before.
This?
Yes. The blue one is the bigger. And what is the reason? The robot can be left-handed or right-handed.
That's true. You're perfectly right. So in theory, they should be exactly the same. But because of we're doing these random movements, so they're different each time, and so the robot probably started on one of the arms. The robot started on one side and did a more thorough and exploration of its space on one side than on the other side.
I see. Thank you.
Okay.